The money was gone before I even sat down. I'd pulled up the app while still in the parking lot of the bank. Habit mostly, something I started doing after my first wife cleaned out our savings back in '09. Old instincts. I saw the number and I just sat there with the engine running, staring at my phone like it had said something in a language I didn't speak. $4,200. Gone in 11 days. I didn't call anyone. I didn't go back inside the bank. I just drove home, slow, the way you drive when your hands aren't quite steady, and you don't want to admit that to yourself. My wife's car was in the driveway. Her son's truck was parked halfway on the grass again, the way he always did, like the rules of the driveway didn't apply to him. I sat in the car for a while before I went in. I want to tell you something before I get into all of it. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I designed bridges. I calculated load tolerances, stress thresholds, the exact point at which a structure fails. I know how things break. I know how long it takes for something that looks solid to quietly become hollow from the inside. I should have known. My wife and I got married 4 years ago. Second marriage for both of us. She was warm in ways my first wife hadn't been. Easy to laugh, good with my adult kids, didn't hold grudges. We'd met through mutual friends at a retirement dinner for someone I'd worked with for 20 years, and we'd taken things slow, the way people our age are supposed to. 18 months of dating before I proposed. I thought I was being careful. She had a son. He was 26 when we got married. He'd had a rough stretch, lost a job in logistics, was between apartments, going through something vague that she described as a hard season. She didn't elaborate. I didn't push. I liked him fine at first. He was polite enough at dinner, helped carry groceries in once or twice when he came by, had a good handshake and remembered to look you in the eye. Those things mattered to me more than they should have. The arrangement was temporary. That was what my wife called it. Her son needed a place to land for just a few months, while he got himself sorted. He'd stay in the guest room. He'd cover his own expenses. He'd be gone by spring. That was 3 years ago. Spring came and went. Then summer. Then another winter. He was still in the guest room, still driving that truck. He never seemed to put gas in himself. Still wearing those expensive headphones I didn't remember anyone buying, and leaving the receipts on the counter like they were meant for me to see and not question. I noticed. I always noticed. But I didn't say anything at first because I loved my wife and because I am, if I'm being honest with myself, the kind of man who waits too long before he says the hard thing out loud. The first loan was $300. He needed his registration renewed, said he'd lost track of the date and the DMV wouldn't work with him. My wife asked me in that particular way she had, soft voice, hand on my arm, eyes that said she already knew the answer she wanted. I said yes. He said he'd pay it back at the end of the month. End of the month came. Nothing. I let it go. I told myself it was $300 and that keeping the peace in your own home is worth $300. That's what I told myself. Then it was a car repair. Alternator, he said. $800. This time he didn't even pretend it was a loan. My wife just told me he was having trouble and looked at me the way she'd looked at me the first time. I paid it. Then there was the weekend trip he took with some friends. I found out about it when I saw a charge on the shared credit card. 2 nights at a hotel in Savannah, meals, a boat tour. $340. I asked my wife about it. She said he'd meant to put it on his own card and it must have slipped through by accident. He didn't have his own card. Not one with any money on it anyway. I knew that by then. I sat at the kitchen table with her and I went through the last 2 months of statements. Not in an angry way. I want to be clear about that. I laid the pages out flat and I walked through each charge, quietly, the way I would have explained a structural diagram to a junior engineer. Here's what I see. Here's what this adds up to. Here's where I need you to help me understand. My wife listened. She said some of the charges were hers, and some of them were, I could see that. She said her son was trying. She said he had some job prospects he was working on. She said he just needed a little more time. She said the word temporary again, and I didn't say anything. What I did was go back and add up every charge I could trace back to him over the previous 14 months. Not guessing, just what I could confirm. Food delivery to the house when I was traveling. The hotel in Savannah. The car repair, the registration, a pair of boots from a retailer I'd never heard of for $220, streaming subscriptions I hadn't signed up for, gas station charges that didn't match any station near our house, $4,800, give or take. He hadn't paid back a cent of it. I closed the folder and I put it in my desk drawer, and I didn't say anything to my wife about it for 3 more weeks. I needed to think. I needed to be sure I wasn't being unfair or paranoid, or just the kind of hard-headed old man who mistakes his own stinginess for principle. But I also started checking the accounts every single morning before I made my coffee, just to see. For a while, things were quiet. He got some kind of part-time work. I never learned exactly what, and he seemed to be around the house less. My wife was cheerful. We had a few good weeks. I thought maybe I'd done the thing I needed to do by laying it all out at that table, even without having a dramatic conversation about it. Maybe the awareness of being seen was enough. Then I started seeing cash withdrawals I didn't make. Not large ones. $60 here, $80 there, sometimes $100. The account we use for household expenses, groceries, utilities, the small incidentals of running a house, had a debit card attached to it. My wife had one, I had one. I had, in a moment of careless generosity about 2 years back, let my wife add her son to the account as an authorized user, just so he could pick up groceries if we needed something and we weren't home. That was my mistake. I own that. I didn't revoke it when the first loan went unpaid. I didn't revoke it after Savannah. I didn't revoke it after the boots or the streaming services. I kept waiting for the problem to resolve itself the way problems sometimes do, when you give them enough space. What I found instead when I started really going through the statements was that those ATM withdrawals had been happening for at least 6 months. Not every week, but regularly, often enough. 60 here, 100 there, amounts small enough that they'd slip past my usual review. I'm thorough, but I'm not meticulous about cash withdrawals the way I am about card charges. I never thought I needed to be. I sat with the statement spread out on my workbench in the garage, and I did the math. Just the cash withdrawals I could confirm over the past 6 months came to somewhere north of $1,400. Add that to the $4,800 I'd already accounted for. Add the months before that I hadn't fully tracked. I stopped adding. I went inside and I poured myself a glass of water, and I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard for a long time. The oak tree my wife loved was starting to drop leaves. The hummingbird feeder she'd put up in the spring was still there, mostly empty now. The truck was in the driveway. I thought about what I would tell a client who came to me with a structure that had been quietly failing for years. Not dramatically. No sudden collapse. Just slow degradation. Load-bearing elements compromised one by one. The stress redistributing. Everything holding together until the day it doesn't. I thought about what I would tell them to do. I didn't tell my wife what I'd found. Not yet. I needed to take care of something first. I went to the bank on a Tuesday morning when my wife was at her sister's and her son's truck wasn't in the driveway. I closed the household account, the one with the debit card attached. I opened a new personal checking account in my name only. I called HR at the firm I still consult for part-time and redirected my direct deposit. I ordered a new card to be mailed to my office address. I also sat down with a woman at the bank who specialized in account security and had a quiet conversation about what protections were available to me going forward. She was professional. She didn't make me feel like a fool, even though I felt like one. When I left the bank, I drove around for a while. I went to the hardware store and looked at locks without buying any. I drove past the park where my wife and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, back when things were simpler. Then I drove home. Her son's truck was back. My wife's car was in the garage. I went inside. They were in the living room, both of them. My wife was on the couch with her hands folded in her lap the way she sits when she's bracing for something. Her son was standing near the window, arms crossed, jaw set. He had his phone in his hand. My wife looked up when I walked in. "Your card didn't work," she said. "Not his card. Your card." Like she was reporting something that had happened to me, something I'd done wrong. "I know," I said. "He was at the grocery store," she said. "He tried to pay and it was declined." I looked at her son. He was watching me with an expression I can only describe as prepared, like he'd already decided how this was going to go. "I closed that account," I said, my wife said. "Because money was leaving it that I didn't authorize," I said. "Over $1,400 in cash withdrawals in the last 6 months alone. That's on top of almost 5,000 I've tracked going back further." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's not," her son started. "I have the statements," I said, "printed and dated. I went through them twice." My wife looked at her son. He looked at his phone, then at me, then at the floor. "Some of that was me," my wife said quietly. "I know which ones were yours," I said. "I'm not talking about yours." Another silence. "I need to understand something," I said, and I kept my voice even. The way you keep your voice even when the thing you're feeling is large and you've decided it isn't useful. The registration, the alternator, Savannah, the boots, the ATM withdrawals, these things happened. I'm not asking whether they happened. I know they did. What I'm asking is why you thought that was something you could do without asking me. Her son didn't answer. He looked at my wife. My wife said, "He needed things." "I know he needed things," I said. "I've been providing things for 3 years." "You make it sound like a ledger," she said. "It is a ledger," I said. "That's what a household budget is. That's what a bank account is. I'm not saying he doesn't have needs. I'm saying those needs have been coming out of my accounts without my knowledge or consent, and I need that to stop. Her son said something then that I want to repeat here exactly, because it is the sentence that told me everything I needed to know about what the previous 3 years had actually been. He said, "I didn't think you'd miss it." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said. I didn't say anything else for a while. I pulled out the chair at the dining table and I sat down. "Here's what I'd like to propose," I said. "And I want both of you to hear me out before anyone says anything." My wife sat a little straighter. Her son stayed by the window. "I've been glad to help," I said. "I mean that. I didn't get married to have a running argument about money. I got married because I love your mother, and I wanted a home that worked for both of us. But a home that works is one where people are honest with each other about what they're taking and what they're contributing. That hasn't been happening." I put my hands flat on the table. "I'm not going to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen," I said, "but I am willing to talk about what happens next. If you want to stay in this house, I need 3 things. First, you get work. Real work, full-time on a schedule. I don't care what it is. Second, you contribute to this household, not to my bank account, to the household. Groceries, utilities, a portion of whatever you earn. We can decide the number together, but there has to be a number. Third, you don't touch any account with my name on it for any reason without coming to me directly, looking me in the eye and asking. Not through your mother, not through a shared card. You ask me." He was quiet. "If those 3 things aren't something you're willing to do," I said, "then I need you to make a plan to move out. I'll give you 60 days. I'll help you with the first and last month's deposit somewhere reasonable. But I'm done with the arrangement as it's been." My wife said his name softly. He uncrossed his arms. He looked at the floor. Something shifted in his expression. Not shame, exactly. More like the surprise of a person who genuinely expected a different outcome and is recalibrating in real time. 60 days, he said. "Or you agree to the 3 conditions," I said. "Your choice." He looked at my wife. She looked at me. I didn't look away. He moved out 41 days later. He didn't take the conditions. He didn't announce that he was leaving either. He just started quietly moving things out over the course of a week. And then one Thursday I came home from a consult and the guest room was empty. He left the key on the kitchen counter. He didn't say goodbye. My wife was upset. Not angry at me exactly, or if she was, she didn't say so directly. She was sad the way people are sad when something they'd been managing finally stops being manageable. She cried a few times. She called her sister. She spent a lot of evenings in the backyard by the oak tree, just sitting. We had some hard conversations during that stretch. Honest ones, more honest than we'd been in a while. She told me she'd known it had gone too far. She said she'd been afraid to ask him to do more because she was afraid he'd disappear on her, the way he'd had a habit of doing in his younger years. She said she thought if she kept things smooth at home, everything would eventually right itself. I told her I understood that. I wasn't entirely sure I did, but I was trying. What I told her, and what I meant, was that I wasn't going anywhere. That wasn't what this was about. I wasn't drawing a line to push her away. I was drawing a line because if I didn't, there would eventually be nothing left of the thing we'd built to stand on. She nodded. She said, "I know." We went back to walking on Sunday mornings. She refilled the hummingbird feeder. I check my accounts every morning still. Not out of suspicion anymore. More out of a habit I've decided to keep. At 63, I've earned the right to know exactly where I stand financially at any given moment. I spent too many years being casual about it, trusting that the people in my life would treat what was mine with care. Some of them don't. Not because they're evil. Sometimes just because you let them believe it was all right not to. I don't let anyone believe that anymore. A few months after her son left, I got a text from him. Just 2 sentences. He said he'd found a job, warehouse logistics, same field he'd been in before. He said he'd pay me back. I read it a couple of times. I wrote back, "Good. Take care of yourself." I didn't hold my breath about the money. That wasn't really the point. What I know now that I didn't know clearly enough before is this. Generosity is not the same as surrender. You can be a giving person and still expect that your generosity be treated with honesty and respect. The moment those things separate, the moment the people receiving your help stop feeling like they need to be honest with you about what they're taking, that's the moment the structure starts to fail, quietly, the way it always does. Load by load, dollar by dollar. You have to catch it before the whole thing comes down. I caught it, later than I should have, but I caught it, and the house is still standing.